In 5 days, the flea market in Tarkov will open for the very first time in patch 16 on the PvP servers after 2 full weeks of the wipe, or at least that's currently what is planned to happen based on what BSG said at the beginning. However, never rule anything out, as there could be an extension or some other surprise coming our way. If it does open as expected though, the market is going to be absolutely wild in the first few days, and if you're well positioned, you could make mad profits in the ensuing chaos. But what is actually going to be expensive when the market opens? Well, the reason why some items will be in such high demand is threefold. Firstly, because the hideout requires find and raid items to build modules in the first place, the demand for inputs to crafts, which produce items with the find and raid tag, should make these extremely sought after. Secondly, players normally source important items for barters with the traders throughout the first 2 weeks of the wipe, but obviously have been unable to do so with the fleet closed. So far, we've all been relying on drops from ourselves only in raid, which means that many players have been unable to buy things that they normally would, like docs cases. There will be a torrent of items coming to the market on day 1 of the flea, but this comes to the last point, limited storage. Patch 16 so far has been the wipe of insane hoarding, most damaging of all for standard accounts, but pretty much every player, no matter what their stash size is completely maxed out on items. This means that when the flea does open, the demand will simply outstrip supply in certain pinch points, driving prices to insane highs at the beginning. Obviously, all of this assumes that the flea is exactly the same as it is last wipe, which it might not be. But if it is, which items will be of the highest value relative to the ease of finding them? Let's start out by looking at the cases, as I think players will be very keen to get a hold of these to sort out their stash space. Okay, so we're going to try to go through these quite quickly so that we don't end up making this video like an hour long. But at the beginning, Lucky Scav Junk Box, there is a way that you can get this from a craft with magazine cases. But given that you could buy this on the Therapist for 1.1 million rubles at level 1, I think this will be kind of limited. You need mag cases, bolts, keg tapes, and I think a lot of this stuff is going to be quite expensive. So ignore this for now. Thick items cases, again, these ones are going to be too far along the progression. People aren't going to be here to be buying 15 LEDXs or 50 bottles of moonshine. So I think, again, don't worry about these items too much for the time being. They'll become important later, just not yet 2 weeks in. Item cases, on the other hand, might be important. This is because you can get a couple of different barters for them, and they barter for Lego medals on ref, but what most people will be doing is using ophthalmoscopes and piles of meds to get this one at Therapist level 3. Therapist level 3 isn't actually that late on, it doesn't take too long to get there, it's only level 24, and so here, piles of meds and ophthalmoscopes are going to be in high demand for people sorting out their stash space in particular. We've got to keep pile of meds in our mind because there's quite a few ones later on where pile of meds is important, so just keep remembering that one. Ballistic plates, this won't be important because you can buy this in cash for 750k once you've completed a side tangent off of Gunsmith Part 7 from Mechanic, so we won't worry about that. The thick weapons case, again, this one's a little bit far. This Bitcoin thing is just stupid because these are nearly 1 million each. The one that used to be quite good was the weapons case and the ammunition case with the metal spare parts, but because these are quite expensive to get at the moment and ammo cases are a bit restricted, again, I think this one's for later in the wipe. Normal weapons cases though, I actually think might be quite good. This one's got lots of different barters. Again, we ignore the physical Bitcoin one because this is going to be nearly 5 million rubles. And the one that used to be quite good was this, the electric motors, 15 wires, broken LCDs, and a phased array element. The only issue here is that electric motors, 8 of them, you actually need quite a few for the hideout. And so I think electric motors will be quite expensive on the flea. Not because people are buying them for their hideout, but because rather than putting them on the flea market, they're using them. I think later on, electric motors will probably become quite cheap because you can't use them for the hideout anymore, and the only use for them is in this weapons case barter. But early on, I think because people will be holding them back for their own hideout, they will be quite expensive on the market. Broken LCDs and phased array elements don't really have that many uses elsewhere, but bundles of wires, again, people have to use so many of these in their hideout early, so they'll be holding them back. Now, the meds case is kind of limited because you can go and buy this from Therapist for 550k-ish, and so this means that the barter here is not really that great value. You've got medical blood sets, disposable syringes, Vaseline, and medical tools. Medical blood sets and disposable syringes in particular, which I think are quite important for people to use elsewhere, and so these ones will be quite expensive, and I think it'll probably just leapfrog over the Therapist level 3 price and not make it worth doing this for the barter. So we should bear in mind blood sets and syringes for other stuff, but not necessarily for this barter in particular. Grenade cases, I don't think the barter for this is going to be particularly good because this is hunting matches and serve Ls. This one's usually not good at all, but people will be using these for the craft. So screw nuts and bolts will be alright because a lot of people use the metal fuel tanks, keep them at 0, and then craft them into grenade cases. And grenade cases can be listed on the flea market, so this can be a good way of making money early. This will drive demand for all of these parts, in particular screw nuts and bolts. The Mr. Holodilnick thermal bag, I think, is going to be one of the most sought after items because you can't store this inside scav junk boxes or some of the other cases that you can get early on, like ammo cases if you're looking at Chemical Part 4. And the ingredients to this, you also can't get this any other way outside of Jaeger. Yes, you could buy it on the Flea, but that's just from players who have done this barter. So here we've got cans of hot rod, Tarcola sodas, herrings, and squash spreads. Now I think hot rods probably will be in demand for this simply because there's so many of them, but these ones always are a bit more expensive than the other foods, and especially squash, because it's used in lots of other places elsewhere, is normally really tight in terms of people needing it. In my opinion, keeping squashes is a really good idea, and we'll see again later where else this crops up. Magazine cases, yes, it's an input for the Scav junk box. I don't think that's necessarily that important. You can buy them on the flea market. You can craft them again, bolts and screw nuts once you're done with your fuel tanks, 0 out of 60 on these. So bolts and screw nuts I think are probably the more important ones to keep to make this magazine case craft work. Ammo cases, now these will be in high demand because people desperately trying to keep their ammo in various things. Mechanic Part 1, Gunsmith Part 5, you will have cans of thermite, which I think will be much more expensive than Eagle gunpowders. Eagles are much easier to find. What you normally find with these barters, if there's a couple of different items in there, usually the rarest barter item spikes in price wildly compared to all the others. Obviously, it really depends on what it is, but versus the kind of middle ground price that you might imagine. But the rarest one typically sets the price of the overall purchase on that barter. So here, I think cans of thermite will be the limiting factor, and Eagles will kind of be not that expensive relative. You can technically also turn them into thick weapons, as we said, but you can buy ammo cases on the fleet as well. So I imagine these are probably going to be quite expensive, maybe a little bit more than a can of thermite plus gunpowder just for the convenience, because they usually are. Money cases. Now, people will want money cases, I think. Maybe not straight away, because people don't necessarily have that much cash to begin with. But these barter items are never problematic to keep lying around. My preference these days to the money case is actually using this one, the streamer item case, which I didn't mention because you can't get this outside of doing the "is this a reference" quest from Fence. We have to place Wi-Fi cameras all over the place. Some people got it from a streamer event where you get to redeem it every single wipe because you just had to do one sub to a streamer. That was a special one-time thing. What you could do with this is that you can put Willer's wallets inside of it, and now that rubles stack up to 1 million, each Willer's wallet will hold 4 million rubles. So along one line of the streamer item case, you actually can hold up to about 24 million rubles or something. Like, it's really a lot. So I don't think I'm going to bother having any money cases. I used this method last wipe, and that was when rubles only stacked to 500k. So now it's twice as efficient in the streamer item case, and I'm probably going to use this instead of the money case. Okay, so where were we? We're down to the money case. So pistol cases, these ones, I don't think anybody actually uses the pistol case. The only reason why they get this is so that they can then make the weapons case afterwards. So piles of meds, remember, pile of meds from before, and disposable syringes will be an input to this. Empty expeditionary fuel tanks basically mean that you can get weapons cases extremely cheaply if you can source pistol cases cheaply, which is why the prices of both of these will be supported by this barter from Therapist. Usually syringes are the most expensive out of these because you can make meds and you can't make syringes. Syringes are finding raid only pretty much, whereas meds you can buy stuff from the Flea, augment in, and then resell them. And because these are barters, they don't need to be finding raid, so all of that stuff works. Documents case. This one is going to be important. People really want this because it's a big early wipe upgrade, but not that many people will have bronze lions. I think lots of people will have cat figurines because they were all over the Christmas trees, so there should be a glut of cats, but I think there's not that many lions going around. There were quite a few in the drops, in fairness, but lots of people want docs cases, so I think that the lion will still probably be quite valuable compared to its innate price. You could argue in some ways that horses will be more expensive simply because you need 4 of them, and I actually haven't seen that many of them. I didn't see many in the drops, and I haven't seen many around in Tarkov land either. I did manage to get my own documents case using a lion from the drops and horses that I'd found, but I think that either of these two could probably be in quite high demand if you want to keep them. The sick case, equally so. This one is a little bit further on. Don't know whether this is going to be in massive demand right away, but this is a ton of paracords, duct tapes, insulating tapes, and packs of nails. And the limiting factor here really is the paracord. So if you want to keep paracord, sell that on the flea market. I think that will do really well early on. Blue tapes probably will too, based on some other crafts elsewhere, and duct tapes maybe a little bit less so, but still kind of important. The key tool. This one isn't useful to look at. You can buy this off ref for about 60 GP coins, I think a little bit more than that. And the barter for it is hydrogen peroxide, saline, and chlorine, which isn't really used anywhere else. So I think these maybe will spike a little bit at the beginning, especially chlorine, because they're kind of random to find. But most people probably past the key tool point at this stage and will be jumping up to a dock or a sick case, I think. So the key tool, I reckon, is probably not that important. The injector case, this one will be important. These can be sold on the fleet, so not too bad. If people are finding them in marked rooms and keeping them in their secure container, then extracting or dying, and then they can relist these non-fanny raid on the fleet, then they won't be quite as expensive as we think. But again, these are disposable syringes, another thing that's coming in for the disposable syringe being important, hydrogen peroxide again, and medical tools. Medical tools are important for making things like CMS kits, kits, and you do need a lot of them to be fair, but they are quite common as well, whereas syringes are a little bit more rare, so syringes I think are the one. The keycard holder, this is just in cash, so I don't think we should worry about this too much, and the rest of them are the other various items. Willis wallets, if you could pick them up for about 30 to 50k, I think it's probably worth it to just hold money in, otherwise don't worry about it too much. The dog tag case is a movie and a military flash drive, but they're not used anywhere else, so it doesn't matter too much either. So for sourcing barter items overall, I think that the important ones are going to be syringes, primarily for medical items. We've also got blood sets, med tools, pylomeds, and ophthalmoscope if you find those lying around as well. For other barter items, I think it's going to be paracord and thermite that will be really expensive. Nuts, bolts, and metal spare parts also will be. And then in terms of nutrition, I think squash and maybe hot rods as well are going to be the ones that are super pricey. But you can still keep the tar curlers and other things as well for the Holodilnick barter too. I've added one final one in post because I remembered this one while I was editing the video, and that is the Red Rebel barter, because people are going to desperately want this because it's really difficult to play reserve without it. And there are some places that you can get out of Lighthouse and Shoreline if you have this as well, along with the paracord. The problem with the Red Rebel barter is that it requires a lot of propanes, which you need for tasks. I think you need 4 of them, as well as fuel conditioners, which are really rare and you need for tasks. I think you need 4 of them, and defuels, which are also kind of rare, and you need 3 plus another 2, I believe, for either various keys like the Ollie Logistics key or for doing heating. So a lot of people are going to be keeping these for themselves, found in raid, and it's only the non-found in raid ones that have come to the fleet. So I think that propanes, fuel conditioners in particular, and dry fuels, these two, fuel conditioners and dry fuels, I reckon those are going to be really expensive because you need a lot of these for the Red Rebel barter, and everybody's going to want one, and I reckon hardly anyone is going to have one at this point. So these 2 items are going to be in particular really, really expensive. So next we're going to swap over to crafts, where I'm just going to skip through. A lot of these aren't actually important, and so most of the time the important ones for these are ones where you can craft something and then get a find in raid component for the hideout or for a quest. Now we're going to talk a little bit about graphics cards first. Do I think graphics cards will be that important early? Actually, probably no, because some people will be buying them for their hideout, but it's going to take people a long time to get to even Bitcoin level 1, because you have to source finding raid components for all of the things. People aren't going to be farming up like 50 GPUs really, really early on in the wipe, because they won't even have a Bitcoin farm to put them in. So I think the GPUs are probably going to take a bit longer to get up to a max price versus other wipes. Same thing goes with Moonshine as well. People are going to have to create the scav case to actually use this properly. Yes, it's important for some barters, things like the thick case as we saw before, but I think the Moonshine won't go as crazy expensive as it has done in the past. And then the same thing is for purified water and for sugar, which are the 2 inputs. So I think these will take a lot longer to get to max price than we have done in previous wipes. So I'm going to skip to the ones that are important first, and I'm actually just going to go straight to the lavatory because I don't think there's that much important in the intelligence center for this. So the first one in here, there's loads of different ones. Yes, some are important for textiles and things like that, but one of the real limiting factors is this, the corrugated hoses. You need corrugated hoses for your own hideout, and thinking back to other wipes, think how expensive corrugated hoses usually are. They're somewhere between 150 and 200k each, so people tend to craft this a lot. So what do you need? Well, now you need the inputs, silicon tubes, bundles of wires, and insulating tape to make these, because you have to make it yourself to be able to use it in the hideout. You can get it at lavatory level 1, so once you've got that up, you then need to be buying these things off the Flea to input into the hideout so you can get them finding raid, so you can then upgrade your modules. I'm pretty much crafting corrugated hoses non-stop at the minute in the lavatory because you just need so many for both the water filtration center and also for the lavatory itself. I think these things are going to be the most important ones, and insulating tape we saw before in the barters section, so insulating tape in particular might be pretty expensive. Next up we have fleece. Fleece is important because you can craft it and actually sell fleece to people, and they will use that to then mop up the damaged wall. So the damaged wall is the bit that you have to smash through with the sledgehammer to get into the gym. But before you build it, you have to mop it up, otherwise you end up with a really big negative XP. The negative XP doesn't go away when you use the fleece fabric, but it makes it smaller, and people can use non-finding raid fleeces to mop it up because it's not a hideout module, it's something that you add into the hideout module like a GPU. So the GPUs don't have to be finding raid, neither do fleece fabrics to actually be used on the module because they're not like part of the module. So you should be able to craft these UX Pro beanies into fleeces once you get to Ragman level 2, and people should be snapping these up on the Flea. These are normally expensive early and then they drop off later. The next one that I think is going to be important is Keck tape. Keck tape is useful for this barter down here, which is lavatory level 2's 60 round magazines, so that you can complete Gunsmith or you can complete the ice cream cones task from Prapor. You can do it with the Christmas dinner task, but there's a lot of people who either just didn't know about it, didn't do it because they didn't get the right RNG, or they've handed one of them in for Gunsmith and so they need to craft another one. Keck tapes also use insulating tape and duct tape as well, so insulating tape again is a really good one to keep a hold of. And I think Keck tapes will probably be quite expensive because of this craft here. Now, one that pops up as you scroll through a little bit further is the paracord one. This one's not important, I don't think, because it takes quite a lot of duffel bags, and you don't need it fine in raid for that many things. People are using this for the barter, but they'll be able to buy it off the flea market. Sure, if it goes really expensive, then maybe you want to craft these things from duffel bags, but duffel bags you can't actually buy. So if you save up some of these, then maybe that will be okay, and duffel bags might be quite expensive then, but I don't think it's worth holding on to these to actually do this barter. I don't think paracord will be expensive enough to tie up your lavatory for 4 hours or so. There is the water filters. Again, because water filtration units are probably coming a lot later down the line, I don't think you bother holding on to any of this stuff, because I don't think this craft will be worth doing early on. These usually take a while to pick up in price, and I think this wipe is going to take even longer. So that's everything that I found that was important in the lavatory. You may disagree with some of these, by the way. Go and have a look through the list yourself if you want to make up your own mind. But this is just my speculation. So, don't just assume that everything I say is going to be right, because I may well have missed something big, or BSG might change something. So next, some useful stuff, obviously, in the med station. Medical blood sets we've seen before. They do need to be created. Silicon tubes. This is shared with one of the crafts that we just saw in the lavatory, as well as syringes too. So syringes are coming back again, yet another time. And we're going to be competing with the medical blood set barter with other crafts and barters for the syringe, and also for the silicon tube for the hoses in the lavatory. So this stuff is going to be quite expensive. Pile of meds, these are important for lots of different barters. Save up your augmentins so that people can then go and craft these. A lot of them are barters, so pile of meds themselves will probably be quite expensive, but augmentins are also going to be expensive too, so that you can then turn them into pile of meds, as it usually happens. The only other one down here is the morphine. Again, this is syringes and pile of meds, so I think the syringes are worth holding on to, because people use these for therapists, and a lot of people I think probably don't have this done or won't have it done by the time the 2-week process disappears. Unless you go to very specific places, you tend not to find them, and then it's kind of RNG amongst other injectors, and so I think a large portion of the player base probably hasn't got this one done yet. Next up, in the nutrition unit, there will be some people who won't have the Iskra rations for Jaeger. It's a really annoying quest. Iskras are not super hard to find, but they are a bit of a pain these days, and this requires army crackers, which you can buy from therapists. You don't need to find those, so that's not important. Small cans of beef stew and cans of squash spread. So the squash is coming back again, and this time we've got the cans of beef stew being introduced. And the reason why that's interesting is that cans of beef stew are required for a quest from therapists later called General Wares, and you need to find 15. So cans of beef stew are going to be in kind of tight supply. It's normally the finding raid ones that matter so much, so it's probably less so for this craft, but squash is important. Now here's the craft itself for the cans of beef stew, and this, lo and behold, requires yet another can of squash spread. So squashes really are just going to be driven up a lot by this. We also have rye croutons, which are usually in quite good demand to do this craft in particular, so that you can complete the quest, along with the normal cans of beef stew as well. And the thing about ryes though is that the flea market fee is usually quite high, so they typically don't end up costing all that much. There is a barter that you can turn Amelia ryes into normal ryes as well, so Amelia rye croutons might be a bit expensive as well because of that, but mostly it's going to be squash. Now, next up we have sugar down here. This one obviously comes from Alyonkers. I actually wouldn't worry about this too much. I know that loads of people love to stock up on sugar and sell it later on in the wipe, but usually by the time that you're selling this stuff for a lot of money, 60, 70, 80k per sugar, normally you don't actually need the money anymore because you've got the Bitcoin farm up, and that's producing Bitcoins with a 1,000,000 ruble price tag on each at the moment. So I don't know, I'm kind of deprioritizing sugar a little bit, and because of the other stuff with Moonshine and the hideout modules, I think that it's going to get expensive later on. So I'm actually not too worried about Alyonkers and packets of sugar at this point. So there's a few others for drinks, which is the vodka. This normally doesn't make sense, but it might do if Moonshine is cheap early, so we're just going to have to see. Whiskey is normally worth doing, because what you could do is drink the bottles of water down to 1 out of 60, and then use them with a vodka, an Alyonka, and a 42 signature blend English tea. And these usually go for about 40 to 60k, depending on what's going on at the time in the flea market. But if they're up at 60, that's definitely worthwhile, because bottle of vodkas go between 20 and 40k depending. Alyonkas are normally about 15, 20k, and teas are 20, because usually they're pinned to the trader price. So if you can then produce these for 130, then that's well worth it, especially if you're drinking bottles of water in the hideout and taking them down to 1 out of 60. You basically get that input for free. This is one that I normally do early on to deal with my waters, and the one that I do later, which I didn't point out because I don't think it's going to be good yet, is this one, the emergency water ration, because this one needs keck tapes, which, as I said, I think they're going to be expensive, but later on in the wipe, they end up getting really cheap because people don't need them anymore, and the emergency water rations can be turned into Salewas using a therapist barter. So remember that one for later. Don't use it now, remember it later, and craft these whiskies in the meanwhile. This one normally never makes sense, but it might do if the purified waters are cheap for longer, as I thought they might be, and the bottles of Pevco Light Beer. This is where Kvass comes in, and more rye croutons, because people need this to unlock Ref. Ref's quest is really annoying because you need 7 Pevco Light Beers, and they're quite rare to find in raid. So normally people do it eventually after getting to nutrition level 3 and doing this craft to be able to get the Pevco Light Beers. So I think that maybe Kvasses and Ryes might be a little bit more expensive. Ryes in particular because they were used for the other craft for the small cans of Tushonka. We then finally have the can of hot rod energy drink. These are used in the holodilnic barter, so these could be quite important. But the inputs to this are all kind of boring, normal sugar, Magica coffee, and tea inputs. It's not really something that you can hoard. The sugar, yes, maybe a little bit, but I don't think the sugar is going to spike because so many people will be hoarding it for later on in the wipe. I just don't think it's going to spike up because of the hot rod energy drink craft, because it's just not important enough. So finally, the important one, the workbench. This is the one that gives you most of your inputs for your hideout. And the first one that I think is going to be important are power cords. This might actually all get turned on its head, because usually people need a ton of wires, but now you need all of your wires found in raid. So it's not really any use buying them off the flea market. You may, on the other hand, turn this around and be buying bundles of wires and T-shaped plugs, combining them with yet another blue insulating tape to make power cords, because you need power cords for the hideout. Normally they're quite plentiful. Yes, you could probably find them yourself quite plentifully, but I think people will be needing power cords because they are also the input for making your own wires, and you need tons of wires. So I think power cords are going to be a little bit tight in some ways, and so that's going to make insulating tape even more crazy, and some normal wires on the fleet as well. A lot of this is quite circular, so for power cords you could turn those into T-shaped plugs too, so there's a lot of them that you could just like turn into each other interchangeably with like a few other random items in. But the next one that I think is actually going to be important is obviously bundle of wires, as we just said. Power cords are going to be in huge demand to get bundles of wires. According to Tarkov Companion, it's got a little part in here which shows you for particular items how many of them you actually need. So if you go into wires, then on this guy, apparently you need 99. So some for fertilizers and all of these other modules you're going to need wires for, which is absolutely insane. So I think power cords are just going to be like off the chart expensive in terms of requirement, because every single wire that you need is going to have to be found in raid, and you're going to have to make a lot of them if you want to do it. Like, who wants to be farming computers for days when you could just craft them in the hideout? Capacitors are important for some stuff, so it may make power supplies kind of expensive, but you don't need that many. You get 6 per, so it's kind of diluted, and they're also 2x2, so I wouldn't necessarily worry too much about power supplies. And one that's usually a fan favorite is the gas analyzer one. Problem with this, it's too early a quest. A lot of people will have it done already. This takes too long, and the inputs are kind of too varied to store any of these things, except for wires, which are useful for other stuff. So I don't worry too much about the inputs for the gas analyzer outside of wires. Now, one that's going to be kind of weird is this one down here, the electric motor. The problem here is that you need a lot of electric motors, but you also need a lot of drills. So drills are going to be really expensive, because people need a ton of drills for themselves. At least for workbench 2, you need 2 of them. You need drills elsewhere in the hideout, and drills are really not that common. You're also going to need insulating tape as well, more blue tape, so blue tape's on the rise, and this is going to allow you to create electric motors. So I think if you do have any excess drills, I think that they're going to go for an absolute bomb on the market. I don't know how much, but if you can store more drills than you need, sell these things, you're going to make a fortune with people trying to turn these things into electric motors. I'll show you here just how many you do actually need. So there's 10 here required, 2 apparently for stash level 3, so if you've got EOD you don't need that, but there's just so many that you need. So overall 12 if you don't have that, 10 if you do. And the electric motors, open that one up and see how many you need for this. This one you need 27, so it's so many. This is going to be a massive bottleneck. This is already causing huge bottlenecks for people on the electric drills themselves, and then the fact that they're also an input to this along with another rare input, I think the drills are going to be mentally expensive. These are normally expensive anyway, and the fact that people now need them finding raid means the supply on the market is going to be super tight early on. So to craft electric motors, you're really going to have to pay an insane amount, hundreds of thousands of rubles for electric drills, I think. Next up, the spark plug. This one's pretty straightforward. Screw nuts and bolts. The Serval lighter, I don't think is that important, but bolts and screws, we've seen them before, so they'll carry on being important, as we said. You need quite a few of these for the hideout itself. You also need some for Therapist as well for her car repair one. So there's going to be quite a lot of demand for the inputs for spark plugs. Another one that there's usually good demand for is Nixel lenses. So Wi-Fi cameras, these can be sold on the flea market, and they can only be purchased if you've got through Skier's quests enough to be able to buy them through Informed Means Armed. Otherwise you have to do a really annoying barter for them. You can get them from Mechanic 1, but all you have to do is accept Informed Means Armed. But Informed Means Armed comes directly after Setup, and a lot of people really don't like Setup because you have to kill people with shotguns on customs. And so the supply for these is normally quite limited. Usually the barter for Wi-Fi cameras is actually quite good. This one here, electronic components and portable power banks going to Wi-Fi camera. Usually that sells for more than the sum of the parts, so you could just kind of churn those around. But if you have the access to just buy them as well, then maybe you can do both and sell them on the flea. So that's a good way to make money, I think. Plexiglass, I don't think it's going to be in that much demand. It's only really required for Nixel lenses. The requirement for the car battery is obviously going to make the tank battery expensive. That's a usual Tarkov staple, so keep a hold of tank batteries if you get them. And usually the green battery is a bit of a limiting factor as well. Nothing really important here in terms of the inputs though, so I actually wouldn't worry about this too much. I wouldn't save any of these. Now this one's a little weird one. You can get thermite from the dorm room 308 key kite gunpowders and metal spare parts. Kite gunpowders can be made on its own. Metal spare parts are relatively common and are part of the other sort of expensive-ish items. I don't think they're going to be crazy because they're not normally needed in massive quantities, but they are important. With the Dorm Room 308 key, this thing might end up just being insanely expensive because of thermite, because of the barter with ammo cases and other things. So watch out for that. Watch out for Dorm Room 308 and keep a hold of them if you need to, just in case cans of thermite end up being insanely profitable. So from all of these, I think the important items are definitely drills. Keep as many drills as you physically can. Next is probably blue tape. This is important for lots of different crafts and inputs for various barters. So this is going to be in high demand as well. And silicon tubes too, because that is an important component to the hoses craft, which a lot of people are going to be doing. Power cords are going to be super important for wires as well. And I think actually wires themselves still will be kind of expensive, but just not as much as they have been in previous wipes. That being said, maybe there'll be more because power cords will be more expensive and so it'll be harder to craft them. I'm not 100% sure, but I definitely, power cords and drills, I would definitely keep. Outside of this, other stuff that might be expensive is the Ushanka. People are using that for setup. That might be expensive on the flea market because you can't buy them, and people have been unable to get access to them up until now, and I guess people probably aren't hoarding them either. Scav vests, those are always expensive for Punisher and also for setup too, and that might make Slickers expensive as well. If the flea market stays exactly the same, ammo like M856A1 is going to be really expensive, the same with FMJ SX, so keep those if you want to make a ton of money. Basically anything under the 42 pen threshold outside of M80, because that's going to be banned still. Aside of that, you might find that the new posters for the hideout are expensive, as well as the Shishka Christmas tree life extender, because that's required for some crafts in the Christmas tree, and I looked on PvE and it is purchasable on the Flea, so keep a hold of those if you can. So I'll put up the lists of all the things that I think are important for you to keep up on the screen here at the end. As usual, a big shout out to all my patrons, and as always, have fun making money in your raids.